At 8,000 meters, truth gets thin. And on May 1st, 2023, a 69-year-old American doctor stepped into a decision that still divides Everest climbers today. Jonathan Sugarman, Seattle physician. Experienced, educated.com under pressure. So here's the question that refuses to go away. Did Jonathan Sugarman die because Everest defeated him, or because he chose not to turn back when every warning was already screaming? High on the mountain, there are no sirens, no judges, no second opinions, only silence and choice. Sugarman wasn't reckless. He wasn't a rookie chasing a bucket list photo. He was a doctor, someone who spent a lifetime saving lives, now gambling with his own in the most unforgiving place on earth. Some climbers say he was strong that day. Others whisper that something was wrong long before the final push. And a few ask the most uncomfortable question of all. Should anyone have stopped him? Because on Everest, the line between respect and responsibility is dangerously thin. Every season the mountain claims bodies, but what makes this story different is not how Jonathan Sugarman died. It's why people argue about it months, even years later. This is not just a story about altitude. It's about pride, autonomy, and the quiet moment when turning back feels harder than moving forward. If you value stories that don't flinch from uncomfortable truths, stories that ask what we owe to ourselves and to others, you're in the right place. This is Ben's Stories. And this is the Everest story that still doesn't have a single agreed-upon ending, because the climb wasn't over when Jonathan Sugarman stopped moving in many ways. That's where the real mystery began. Jonathan Sugarman did not arrive at Everest chasing glory. He arrived quietly. No loud interviews, no social media countdowns, no dramatic speeches about destiny. At 69, he had already lived several full lives. Decades as a physician in Seattle. Years of disciplined training, a reputation among friends as methodical, thoughtful, almost stubbornly calm. This climb was not a whim. It was planned years in advance. He trained his lungs, he trained his legs, he trained his mind, and most importantly, he believed in preparation over bravado, the opposite of how Everest is often portrayed. By the time Sugarman reached base camp in April 2023, the mountain was already crowded. Post-pandemic traffic had returned with force. Dozens of teams, hundreds of climbers. Fixed ropes stretching upward like promises that could break at any moment. Among them were climbers half his age. Some respected him instantly. Others quietly doubted him. Age on Everest is never neutral. It's either wisdom or weakness. Jonathan didn't talk much about his age. He talked about pacing, about oxygen strategy, about turning around early if the body said no. But Everest has a way of turning if into when. As April progressed, weather windows narrowed, wind patterns shifted, summit pushes became a waiting game. Every extra day at altitude drains the body even for professionals. And yet Sugarman kept moving upward. Camp 2, Camp 3. No dramatic incidents, no rescues, no red flags loud enough to stop him. But some teammates later recalled something subtle. Not collapse, not confusion, just quiet fatigue. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind a doctor might rationalize. By late April, teams were watching forecasts obsessively. May 1st emerged as a possible summit window, narrow, imperfect, but usable. And on Everest, usable is often enough. The decision to go is rarely unanimous. Some climbers stayed back, some guides hesitated. Sugarman did not. He moved toward camp for the death zone, where the human body begins to die slowly, even at rest. Above 8,000 meters, digestion fails. Sleep becomes illusion. Judgment frays at the edges. And yet, this was the final gate. Those who pass it accept an unspoken contract. You may not come back the same, or at all. Jonathan Sugarman clipped into the fixed lines and climbed higher. He was no longer a doctor, no longer a husband, no longer a man with a full life behind him. Up there, everyone becomes a patient, and Everest decides the diagnosis. The summit was close enough to imagine, and far enough to demand everything. What no one knew, not his teammates, not the guides, not even Sugarman himself, was that the most dangerous moment was not ahead of him. It was already happening inside him, and by the time the mountain revealed it, turning back would feel impossible. Above Camp 4, the mountain stops pretending. The air thins to a third of what the body needs. Every step becomes a negotiation. Every breath feels borrowed. Jonathan Sugarman entered the death zone before midnight, headlamp on, oxygen mask sealed, fixed rope cold beneath his gloves. Around him a line of climbers moved upward in silence, silhouettes stitched to the slope like slow-moving shadows. No chatter, no encouragement. Just the sound of regulators hissing and boots crunching into ice. This was the summit push. The moment everything else in life fades away. Sugarman moved steadily, not fast, not slow, measured. That was his style. Some climbers passed him, others fell behind. At this altitude, comparison is poison. You climb your own body, your own limits. Hours passed. The sky began to lighten somewhere far above Tibet. Dawn crept in quietly, revealing a brutal truth. The wind was stronger than expected. Not violent, but constant. Enough to drain heat. Enough to steal strength invisibly. Radio chatter crackled in fragments. Summit still possible. Conditions manageable. That word again, manageable. Around 8,300 meters, the first real signs appeared. Sugarman slowed, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. A climber behind him recalled later that his movements looked deliberate, almost heavy, as if each step required a moment of internal calculation. He stopped once, adjusted his mask, checked his oxygen. Everything looked fine. That's what made it dangerous. Hypoxia doesn't always announce itself with panic. Sometimes it whispers confidence, a false sense of control. Sugarman was a physician. He understood physiology. He knew the signs. And that knowledge may have worked against him, because when the body begins to fail gradually, the mind looks for reasons to continue. I've felt worse. I'm just tired. One more rest. Above them, the summit ridge waited still hours away. Below them, Camp 4 might as well have been another planet. Turning back now meant descending through traffic. Through climbers still ascending. Through the quiet, unspoken pressure of not being the one who quits. No one forced him upward, but no one stopped him either. As the sun climbed, so did the cost. Sugarman's pace dropped further. A guide nearby reportedly asked if he was okay. Sugarman nodded. That nod would later be dissected endlessly. Was it clarity or confusion? Was it pride or resolve? On Everest, those lines blur quickly. At some point above 8,400 meters, Jonathan Sugarman sat down. Just briefly, just to rest. Sitting down in the death zone is never just sitting down. Time stretches, cold creeps in, the body begins making decisions of its own. Other climbers passed him, some looked back, some didn't. Everyone had their own summit to chase, and that is the cruel truth of Everest. Compassion costs oxygen. Stopping costs time. Helping can mean dying together. The mountain doesn't reward good intentions. When Sugarman stood again, something had changed. His movements were slower, less coordinated. The summit was still there, impossibly close now, a white curve against the sky, close enough to justify anything. And somewhere inside Jonathan Sugarman's mind, a calculation was running. One last question: do I keep going, or do I admit the mountain has already won? He chose, and the mountain took note. The fracture didn't come with a scream. It came quietly. Somewhere between effort and exhaustion, Jonathan Sugarman's climb shifted from difficult to dangerous, and no one could point to the exact second it happened. That's what haunts people. There was no dramatic fall, no snapped rope, no sudden storm, just a slow unraveling. At extreme altitude, the brain begins to ration honesty. It hides weakness behind routine. It turns warnings into inconveniences. Sugarman kept moving, but now he moved differently. Shorter steps, longer pauses, hands lingering on the rope as if confirming it was real. A nearby climber later said something felt off, not panic, not collapse. Absence, as if Jonathan was still there physically, but partially elsewhere. This is the moment Everest veterans fear most, when the body remains upright, but judgment slips out the back door. The summit ridge loomed closer, yet progress slowed to a crawl. The wind bit harder, oxygen flowed, but its effect dulled. At some point, a guide made the unthinkable suggestion: turn around. Not a command, a question. Sugarman listened. He didn't argue, he didn't resist, but he didn't turn either. This is where the story fractures into versions that will never fully align. One account says he insisted he was fine. Another says he nodded again, that same nod, the one that meant nothing and everything at once. The mountain doesn't care which version is true, because the damage was already done. Above 8,500 meters, time stops behaving normally. Minutes stretch. Decisions slow. The body begins to betray its owner, shutting down heat, coordination, clarity, all in the name of survival that paradoxically leads to death. Sugarman sat down again, this time longer. That was the point of no return. Climbers know the rule. Everyone knows the rule. Do not sit down in the death zone. But knowing rules and obeying them are two different things when your brain is starving. Attempts were made. Encouragement, gestures, words shouted through masks and wind. Stand up, move, descend. Sugarman responded, but not fully. He stood, then sank again. The mountain had begun its final negotiation. Those around him faced an impossible choice. Helping him meant stopping their own descent. Stopping meant exposure. Exposure meant becoming another body on the slope. Everest does not present moral dilemmas politely. It presents them brutally. Eventually the decision was made not because anyone wanted it, but because the mountain forced it. Jonathan Sugarman was left where he sat, alive but fading. And this is where controversy ignites. Some say more could have been done. Others say doing more would have killed everyone involved. The internet would later reduce it to a single, poisonous question. Was he abandoned? But the truth is colder. On Everest, rescue above 8,500 meters is almost impossible. Not difficult, not risky, impossible. The body cools. Oxygen runs low. The brain slips further away. By the time help might return, there is no one left to help. Sugarman's last moments were quiet. No camera, no final message. Just wind, ice, and a mountain that does not remember names. Below him, climbers continued moving, some toward the summit, others toward survival. Above him, the peak waited, unmoved, unchanged, and Jonathan Sugarman became something else. Not a climber, not a doctor, a question, a marker, a reminder that on Everest, the line between courage and collapse is thinner than the air itself, and once you cross it, there is no arguing your way back. The mountain didn't pause after Jonathan Sugarman stopped moving. That is the part people struggle to accept. While his body cooled on the upper slopes, the summit push continued. Climbers passed above him. Some knew who he was, some didn't. Most understood exactly what had happened, even if they never said it out loud. Because on Everest you learn to read the mountain the way sailors read the sea, and the signs were unmistakable. Sugarman was no longer climbing Everest. Everest was finishing with him. Higher up, the summit ridge filled with silhouettes. Flags snapped in the wind. Oxygen gauges dropped toward empty. For those still climbing, the summit was no longer a dream. It was right there. But the cost had already been paid. Every climber who reached the top that day did so knowing, consciously or not, that someone had been left behind. This is the unspoken weight of Everest success. A summit photo does not show who didn't make it. As hours passed, Sugarman's body became still. Not violently. Not suddenly, quietly. The death zone does not take lives in dramatic fashion. It simply removes what the human body needs to continue. Heat, oxygen, time. By the time descending climbers passed again, there was no question left to ask. Jonathan Rule Sugarman, physician, husband, father, climber, had died high on the mountain at an altitude where helicopters cannot reach, where rescue teams cannot function, where even grief feels thin. He would not be brought down. He would remain where he fell, not as a punishment, not as a warning, but as a consequence. Back at lower camps, news spread quickly. Shock, then silence. People replayed conversations, moments that nod. Could someone have turned him around earlier? Should age have mattered more? Should the expedition have enforced a harder cutoff? And then came the most uncomfortable realization of all. Every decision that led to this outcome had made sense at the time. That is what makes Everest so dangerous. It doesn't require foolishness, only optimism, only momentum, only one moment where stopping feels worse than continuing. Jonathan Sugarman had lived a life built on responsibility. He understood risk, he accepted it, and that acceptance is exactly why his death sparked debate. Some climbers defended the choice to leave him. They had to. Others criticized the system that allows people to climb beyond the reach of rescue. Families watching from afar asked questions that would never be answered. Was the summit worth it? Is any mountain worth a life? Everest offers no reply. It stands, it waits, and it keeps what it takes. In the days that followed, photos circulated online, not graphic, not sensational, just enough to remind the world that the mountain still claims lives quietly, even in the age of technology. Jonathan Sugarman became another name added to a long list. But names don't tell stories, choices do, and the final choice to keep moving upward just a little longer is the one that echoes the loudest. Because Everest didn't trick him, it didn't ambush him. It simply asked the same question it asks everyone. How much are you willing to give, and when will you stop? Jonathan Sugarman answered, and the mountain accepted. Jonathan Sugarman did not die chasing death. He died chasing meaning. That distinction matters, because Everest is not a murderer, it is a mirror. It reflects who we are when comfort disappears, when identity strips away, when the only thing left is a choice between stopping and continuing. Sugarman spent his life helping others survive, making rational decisions under pressure, trusting data, trusting experience. On Everest, those tools failed him not because they were wrong, but because the mountain operates outside human logic. Up there, willpower can outpace wisdom, momentum can drown out warning, and pride doesn't always look like arrogance. Sometimes it looks like quiet confidence. That's why his story lingers. Not because he was careless, but because he was careful right up until careful was no longer enough. Some viewers will ask why didn't they save him? Others will say they couldn't. Both are true. Everest exposes an uncomfortable reality we don't like to admit, especially as we age. There comes a point where experience cannot protect us, where independence collides with limitation, where the body stops negotiating, and the hardest lesson of all, knowing when to turn back is not weakness. It is wisdom earned too late by many. Jonathan Sugarman didn't fail Everest. Everest simply enforced the final rule, the one no summit photo can erase. You do not conquer the mountain. You only survive it if it allows you to. His body remains high above the clouds, where time barely moves. But his story continues in debates, in discomfort, in the quiet questions climbers ask themselves before every summit push. What would I do? Would I stop, or would I take one more step, believing it still made sense? That is why we tell these stories on Ben Stories, not to judge, not to glorify tragedy, but to understand the thin line between courage and cost. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, share your thoughts in the comments. There is no single right answer here, and if you want more real Everest stories, the ones that don't look away when things get uncomfortable, make sure you subscribe to Ben Stories, because the mountain isn't done teaching us, and neither are we.